Hello and welcome to KRSE Beyond the Ordinary Webcast Radio. And guess what time it is? It's right now human. Right here with your host Nancy Elena.
With Clif, who is definitely beyond human. He's improving a lot.
You could say half-assed human here too.
No, that's probably much more accurate.
And you want him to return this?
I know.
Is this the way to approach it?
He knows we love him.
Yeah. Well, I hear that stuff from my wife all the time anyway. So yeah, not a problem, guys.
Okay. Do you want to start with that question, or would that be better?
It actually doesn't matter much. I can go into that real quick, and
okay.
We can just get that out of the way. One of the readers, or some readers, have asked a question about this issue on page 34, or bottom of 33, top of 34, on the most recent report about the powers that be and their fear levels and their anxiety, which are actually stemming from this linguistic area that is headed by a descriptor of last, not as in the end, but will it last? Can we make it last? Can it endure? Do we have the resources? So really those are all synonyms for the descriptor set that leads this. And what the powers that be are apparently afraid of is a convergence of the awakening process in humans, in the planetary society, which is racing around the whole Earth now, because it's got to go around many times in order to sweep us all up. And at the same time, they're depleting level of resources, because bear in mind that not only are the resources of the planet being consumed very fast for all of the billions of people, but the resources that the powers that be can take off as a secret tax exist only when people play the game or buy into the system. So as this wave of awakening, if you will, sweeps through all of the planet, and more people opt out and become non-cooperative, then that reduces the amount of this hidden tax that the powers that be can take away. It also brings other pressures on their ability to do that hidden tax, in the sense that look at all the outrage on the missing money from the bankers, and what would happen now if they tried to take another, say, $6 or $8 or $10 trillion and suck it away into the Department of Defense, into the shadow government to supply these black ops guys. Well, that level of blatant extraction or taxing of the whole system just can't fly anymore. And so they're very afraid, because they're now in a position where they have to use fundamentally just the resources that they have. They're not going to be able to do as they did in the year 2000. I think it was $2 trillion went through the Department of Defense and disappeared into the shadow government, and then $1.7 trillion the next year, and so on. And that kind of stuff just can't happen anymore. True, they can be taking stuff out of the corporate bailouts, but the value of that money is way reduced, and it's just not going to be adequate to their needs. So they're running into a situation of their fear is based on their ability to continue their suppression with the resources they have against a very rapidly enlarging populace that is resistant to them, and everybody who's resistant to them costs them more money. At all levels, takes more time and energy for the propagandists to try and sway you back into their way of thinking, and you cause resistance, you don't pay taxes the way they want you to, et cetera, et cetera. And so it all builds up, and that pressure, I think they've got somebody in there plotting it out, and their fear words suggest that the plot does not favor their ability to maintain this long enough to see them through 2013, which apparently is some kind of a goal for them. I say that because we do have linguistics that suggest that the powers that be are all hung up on the early part of 2013, as though if they make it there, somehow they have a better opportunity for the next decade from that point on.
Interesting.
Okay.
Wow.
Why that should be, we don't know. We don't have much in the way of definitive linguistics that would suggest that it's because they suspect that A, B, or C would have passed by then, or it would have been over. But probably there is that level of thinking involved. We just don't know what it is they're directly afraid of.
Well, what about the planet itself, the nature on Rampage coming up?
That is certainly a component of the fear of the powers that be, guys. There's no question about that. And if we looked at the spread of emotional language within that entity related to their version of fear, we could say that some 60% of their aggregate fear appears to be planet-bound. And I say planet-bound because some subsets of that are clearly extraplanetary in origin. So let's say that 60% or more of their motivation at the moment is fear around what's going to happen to Earth, but on top of that, there are all these other social issues that they're afraid of, and they actually are shifting more of their language at the moment to being afraid of the social issues rather than the slightly longer-term planetary stuff. So basically what their viewpoint is that, well, there's going to be a lot to be afraid of about the planet, but we think we've got that handled. On the other hand, we're really not so sure about these humans running around. And so their fear language is shifting over slightly towards that direction, towards the 30-some-odd% that's involved with the fear of a political or consciousness awakening. That makes sense?
Yes. How do you extract, how do you find really the powers that be processes of thinking or emotion or whatever, when how far into the layers do you get? They are so hidden behind layers of minions, the puppets.
Yeah, but it's actually very straightforward. They tell you their language is out there all the time. So, for instance, you can have a YouTube experience and go and look up Zbigniew Brzezinski, and I don't know which video it's going to be, but in one of those, the major line in it, for my way of thinking, and it would have been in the last couple of months that it would have been posted on YouTube, so you shouldn't have to go back that far. But the main line is where he states, we are desperately afraid of or in fear of a planetary mass political awakening. And he says it with real fear in his voice and in his face. I don't know who he was talking to. I only had a few minutes to look through it. But that kind of examples of language pops up all the time. Now, in our aggregation, what we're doing is looking at archetypes for a future sort of a language. And I can explain that with recent events here in a second. But we started way back when by analyzing places like the Council for Foreign Relations and all of these other societies that are known to be part of the larger establishment or the powers that be. And then in analyzing that language, we got a very clear picture of their mindset, how they use words, and what layers of masking they use. There was this discipline, or art, I don't know really how you want to characterize it, but called SKED. And now it's SKED, but back when it originated was prior to the great period of debates and rhetoric in Rome. A person with a silver tongue in Rome could actually talk their way into being a senator, much the same as it is today. But back then they highly prized the ability to debate and think rationally and also to give speeches extemporaneously or crafted. Didn't really matter to them. It was the use of language, and the whole Roman society was really enthralled with it. And so they had this analysis method to make you a better debater that analyzed the the words used in seeing what was revealed about the knowledge set. Because, for instance, some people could come on up and claim a certain amount of technical expertise, but you can tell if you're in that technical level of technical expertise, you can tell within minutes by how they use language around it as to whether they're legit or not, or whether they're a poseur. And so that kind of thing was analyzed, and a whole series of rules and stuff was extracted, and we used those in our initial analysis to get a clue as to how various different groups use language. And so since then, it's been relatively straightforward. The powers that be communicate to each other all the time. They leave layers of stuff on top of what they're putting out in the propaganda for the people to consume that are simply taking their information off of TV and out of the newspapers. But there's other layers that are very clearly communicated and easily picked up. So it's not that difficult for that particular group.
That's brilliant. Yes. Okay, you were going to talk about some of the interesting things that were happening, and that's where your example of this in a minute?
Yeah, actually. So sometime back here, I think it was in the end of August, I was getting into the interpretation for the report that we just issued on the 15th, and in the process, I had to go through all the immediacy data. Now, we break all of our data down into 3 groups: immediacy, short-term, and longer-term. And the immediacy data is effective usually from about 3 days from the point we capture it to about 3 weeks. Not much longer than that usually. Maybe the end of the 3rd week. And the shorter-term data is from the 3rd week through about the end of the 3rd or 4th month, and the longer-term data is from the 4th month onward. And the immediacy data is usually the largest, because the theory upon which we work is that, well, basically everybody's psychic, and they leak out all these little bits of psychic stuff. And, of course, the lower grade of a psychic you are, the shorter range your vision is likely to be. Just sort of stands to reason. And that's, again, a premise that we're operating on, that those people that don't really know they're psychic are just sort of wandering around driving and stuff and bump into their psychicness, they're not going to really bump into any long-range sort of predictions. They're going to get mainly the short-term stuff. So we always have a lot of volume of that. In that group, I came up with a bunch of temporal markers that are on a particular path. And one was that, well, we were going to have a fairly large earthquake of some damage, a lot of words about buildings falling into their foundations. And this would occur around between the 2nd and 4th of September. And then we were going to have some minor terrorism incidents that appeared to span from the 7th through the 9th. And then we were going to have a surprise hurricane, I said, that would affect the East Coast, and that would happen around the 13th to the 15th, maybe out to the 17th, but it just seemed to center around the 15th. Well, we did have the earthquake. It was the Indonesian one. There were a fair number of houses that did indeed, when the pictures came out some weeks later, show up, collapsed into their foundation. And then we did have the minor terrorism events. On the 7th of September, we had a bomb explode outside the stock exchange in Athens. We had terrorism events in India that were quashed or thwarted on the 8th. And then on the 9th, there was something I can't remember at the moment. So we had it was spread out over those 3 days. And then I thought, oh, well, it looks like we missed it on the 15th, because the 15th came and went, no surprise hurricane. But it turns out that there was a low pressure that moved over on the 14th and started raining over the southeast of the U.S. And it's been raining since the 14th, and we now have huge amounts of flooding in South Carolina, Georgia, that region, in the southeast. Then the flooding, when you go and you have